This is a dear friend of mine and definitely a hero of mine. Please put your hands together for
The glittering lights of Nashville, the roaring crowds, the platinum records on the wall. For so many country legends, success once looked eternal. But as history shows, fame is fragile, and fortune can vanish in the blink of an eye. Some of the biggest stars in country music history, men and women who shaped the very sound of the genre, ended their lives not in mansions but in poverty. How does someone go from sold out tours and million-dollar royalties to living broke, forgotten, or worse? Today, we're counting down 16 country music stars who died broke and broken despite once swimming in riches. Get ready because these stories are not for the faint of heart.
We haven't been able to do it as much, but for recent years we've been able to get together in several different places.
Larry John Wilson was never a household name, but among songwriters, he was revered. His 1970s albums, New Beginnings, Let Me Sing My Song to You, Loose Change, were masterclasses in storytelling. His voice was deep, soulful, unforgettable. Critics loved him. Fellow musicians adored him. But mainstream country? They didn't know what to do with him. His sound was considered too different for the radio, and without radio, you couldn't survive in Nashville. By the 1980s, Larry John had to step away from music. He drove trucks, sold tires, even taught guitar in small towns where no one knew he was once on the cover of Rolling Stone. But he never truly gave up. In the late 80s and again in the 2000s, he staged small comebacks, recording and touring when he could. Yet money was always tight. In 2010, at 69 years old, Larry John checked into a hospital with chest pains. He died of a stroke not long after. And like so many before him, he left behind more bills than money. A man whose songs carried the soul of the South, but whose life ended with the weight of financial struggle pressing down.
Lefty? Hello, hello. Well, it's a pleasure.
In the pantheon of country legends, Lefty Frizzell stands as one of the true architects of the honky-tonk sound. His voice carried a smoothness and sincerity that influenced everyone from Merle Haggard to George Jones. When Lefty burst onto the scene in 1950 with his debut singles, If You've Got the Money, I've Got the Time, and I Love You a Thousand Ways, he didn't just score hits. He rewrote the rules of country music. By 25, Lefty wasn't just famous. He was a household name, cruising around in Cadillacs, living fast, and enjoying the rewards of stardom. But like so many before and after, Lefty had an Achilles heel. Behind the fame lurked addiction and bad business decisions. By 1953, alcohol had him in a chokehold. Combine that with shady contracts and mismanagement, and the money started slipping through his fingers. Desperate to keep himself afloat, Lefty did the unthinkable. He sold his publishing rights just to cover tax liens. The royalties that should have carried him through life were gone forever. He sold off prized possessions, even his diamond-studded guitar. The man who once lived like royalty now lived in a modest rented apartment, watching his career and his health collapse. By the mid-70s, the years of drinking caught up with him. On July 19, 1975, Lefty Frizzell died of liver failure at just 47 years old. His funeral was paid for not by his own fortune, but by the generosity of friends and fellow musicians who couldn't believe such a giant had fallen so far. Lefty left behind a legacy of music that shaped the genre, but his personal life stands as one of the starkest warnings in country history. Success can vanish as fast as it arrives.
Ready, if you're willing.
The 1950s belonged to Johnny Horton. His saga songs and epic narratives like the Battle of New Orleans weren't just hits, they were cultural events. In 1960, Horton won a Grammy for Best Country and Western Recording. His songs became part of American history itself. But fate doesn't respect fame. That same year, on November 5, 1960, Horton's Cadillac was struck head-on by a drunk driver near Milano, Texas. Johnny Horton died en route to the hospital. He was only 35. The shock was devastating, but the aftermath was worse. His life insurance had not been updated, and his publishing rights were tied to future recordings that would never happen. His widow, Billie Jean, who had already endured tragedy as the widow of Hank Williams Sr., was left destitute. While Horton's songs played on radios everywhere, his family was drowning in debt. Billie Jean was forced to take menial jobs just to keep her daughter in school. Think about that, one of the biggest stars in country music, reduced to a legacy of bills and heartbreak. Johnny Horton should have been remembered as one of the greats who died at the peak of his career. Instead, he became another cautionary tale of how quickly fortune can vanish.
Stay away from the bow. If I was as young as you.
If country music had a Shakespeare, it might have been Townes Van Zandt. His lyrics were poetry, dark, haunting, unforgettable. Songs like Poncho and Lefty, For the Sake of the Song, and Waiting Round to Die cemented him as one of the greatest songwriters in American history. But genius rarely comes without a price. For Townes, that price was his own sanity. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder, he underwent shock therapy that reportedly wiped out chunks of his memory. He drifted through life like a ghost. One moment brilliant, the next lost in a fog of alcohol and despair. He spent years crisscrossing the country, playing in dingy bars, college coffee houses, and tiny clubs. He didn't care about money, often signing away royalty checks to strangers or losing them in drunken hazes. Friends would beg him to straighten up, to take care of himself, but Townes seemed determined to burn out rather than fade away. By the 1990s, the years of drinking had left his body frail. On New Year's Day, 1997, he died of cardiac arrhythmia at just 52 years old. He left behind a catalog of songs that other artists turned into gold, but Townes himself? He died with almost nothing to his name. Even today, fans ask, was Townes Van Zandt a victim of the industry, of addiction, or of his own tragic genius? Maybe it was all three.
Run, rabbit. Run, rabbit.
David Stringbean Ackerman was more than just a banjo picker. He was a comedian, a showman, a true Opry favorite who brought laughter and music together in a way few could. His style was unmistakable. Tall, lanky, dressed in comically short pants, banjo slung across his chest. But beneath the humor lay scars from his childhood and the Great Depression. Stringbean never trusted banks. He lived frugally, sometimes even cheaply, while quietly hiding thousands of dollars in his rustic Tennessee cabin. Stuffed behind chimney bricks, under floorboards and corners, no one would think to look. He had money, but he never touched it. He lived as though he was still poor, terrified that one day it would all disappear. In November 1973, tragedy struck. Returning home from the opera, Stringbean and his wife were ambushed by two robbers. Both were shot and killed on their front porch. Years later, when new owners renovated the cabin, they discovered moldy bundles of cash hidden away, more than $20,000. Money Stringbean died protecting, but never used. His story is one of the most haunting in country music. A man who brought joy to millions, murdered because of a fear that poverty would come knocking again. And in the end, it did. Only in a way no one could have imagined. Before alt country was a buzzword, before Americana had its name, there was Gram Parsons. He called it cosmic American music, a blend of rock, soul, folk, and country that influenced everyone from the Eagles to Emmylou Harris. Born into wealth, Gram inherited a fortune at 21. But with fortune came temptation, and Gram burned through it in record time. Drugs, women, parties, it was all excess all the time. His band, the Flying Burrito Brothers, crumbled under the weight of it. Soon, Gram was scrounging for spare change just to buy breakfast. Despite his downward spiral, Gram's influence was undeniable. Rolling Stone later ranked him among the 100 greatest artists of all time, but he never lived to see the recognition. In 1973, while on a trip to Joshua Tree, Parsons overdosed on a lethal mix of morphine and alcohol. He was only 26. His friends, knowing his wish, stole his body from the airport and cremated him in the desert. But here's the tragic irony. Gram Parsons, the rich kid who once had it all, died penniless. His estate couldn't even cover the bills. A legend in death, but a financial ruin in life.
I was raised on country sunshine.
She was one of the first women to truly break through in Nashville. With hits like Country Sunshine and A Lesson in Leavin', Dottie West wasn't just a star, she was a pioneer. In the 1960s and 70s, her glamorous stage presence and soaring vocals made her a household name. She won a Grammy, headlined tours, and was considered one of country music's brightest female icons. But behind the spotlight, Dottie's life unraveled. Bad business decisions, multiple divorces, and lavish spending left her drowning in debt. By the late 1980s, she had lost nearly everything. In 1990, her possessions, from stage outfits to personal memorabilia, were auctioned off to cover bankruptcy filings. The woman who once lived like royalty was now forced to rely on friends for shelter. Yet even in her darkest moments, Dottie never lost her determination. She still dreamed of making a comeback, booking small shows and telling anyone who'd listen that she'd rise again. But fate had other plans. In August 1991, while on her way to perform at the Grand Ole Opry, Dottie accepted a ride from a neighbor. The car crashed en route, and though she initially survived, complications set in. She passed away a few days later at just 58 years old. At the time of her death, she was nearly penniless. A heartbreaking end for one of country's most dazzling voices. Dottie West's legacy remains strong today, with younger artists citing her as a trailblazer. But her tragic fall is a stark reminder. In country music, even the brightest stars can lose it all. If you've ever heard "Send Me the Pillow," "You Dream On," or "Please Help Me, I'm Falling," then you know the voice of Hank Locklin. For decades, he was one of country's brightest stars. A regular at the Grand Ole Opry, a global touring sensation, even a pioneer in taking country music overseas. But here's the cruel irony. While Hank sold millions of records, he barely saw a fraction of the royalties. Contracts in those days weren't written to protect artists, and Hank paid the price. By the mid-60s, as the British rock invasion stormed American airwaves, bookings dried up. The audiences that once adored him drifted toward new sounds. By the 1970s, Hank was struggling with debts he didn't even create, including loans he never signed. The man who once played packed houses around the world retreated quietly, moving to Bruton, where he lived out his later years. Hank Locklin passed away in March 2009 at the age of 91, remembered more for his music than his fortune. A man with 70 chart singles, yet in the end, he was left fighting to hold on to what little he had. Gentleman Jim Reeves, the velvet-voiced crooner who helped shape the Nashville sound. His hits, "Welcome to My World," "Adios Amigo," "He'll Have to Go," defined an era. Reeves wasn't just a singer, he was a pioneer who bridged country with pop, opening doors for generations after him. But Jim also loved flying. And on July 31st, 1964, that passion cost him everything. His Beechcraft Debonair aircraft went down in a storm near Nashville. Reeves and his business partner both died instantly. But here's the darker side of the story. Jim had invested in cattle, property, and businesses. Yet after his death, unscrupulous partners and bad contracts stripped his widow of nearly everything. She fought legal battles for decades, even mortgaging their home just to pay for lawyers. By the time victory finally came in the 1990s, the money had already been swallowed by medical bills and debt. Jim Reeves, the man who sold millions of records worldwide, left behind almost nothing tangible for his family. It's a cruel reminder that even the biggest stars can be robbed blind. Not by fate, but by the very system meant to protect them. For decades, Hank Snow was everywhere. From the 1950s to the 1980s, he recorded more than 140 albums, racked up 85 chart singles, and gave us classics like "I'm Moving On," "The Golden Rocket," and "I've Been Everywhere." His music was a patchwork of freedom, travel, joy, and heartache. Stories of the open road sung by a man who knew what it meant to fight for survival. Born in Nova Scotia, Canada, Hank grew up in poverty and abuse. Music became his escape. And when he finally broke through in Nashville, he wasn't just successful. He became a mentor to a young Elvis Presley. Imagine that. Hank Snow, the man who once had nothing, guiding the future king of rock and roll. But even legends can fall victim to betrayal. Snow hired managers he trusted, only to have them sabotage his finances behind his back. They mismanaged his money, siphoned profits, and left him drowning in debt. To salvage what remained, Hank invested in ranching. But when floods wiped it all out, he was back at square one. The deepest cut came from his own family. His son mishandled funds meant for touring, leaving Hank financially crippled and emotionally broken. On December 20th, 1999, Hank Snow died at his Rainbow Ranch in Madison, Tennessee. After his death, it was revealed that the debt he carried was so severe, it equaled the value of the very tour bus he had once proudly purchased. From poverty to fame, back to poverty again, Hank Snow's story is a tragic circle, a reminder that even icons aren't immune to betrayal.
Right off of my mind. Break.
The name says it all. Johnny Paycheck, the outlaw who gave us one of the most iconic working-class anthems of all time. Take this job and shove it. A voice for the fed-up, the blue-collar, and the rebellious. In the 1970s, Johnny was on top of the world. He wasn't just part of the outlaw country movement. He was one of its leaders, rubbing shoulders with Hank Williams Jr., Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Merle Haggard. His voice was raw, gritty, and unapologetic. But behind the outlaw image was a man at war with himself. Drugs, pills, cocaine, they ate away at his fortune as fast as he earned it. Lawsuits and legal battles followed, and by the early 1990s, Paycheck was sitting in a prison cell. When he finally got out, he was a shadow of his former self. And worse, the IRS came knocking. They took it all. His home, his tour bus, even his Grammys. Imagine that. The awards that symbolized his greatest triumphs repossessed like unpaid furniture. At one point, the once great Johnny Paycheck was reduced to begging for gas money at stations, his health failing from asthma and emphysema. On February 19, 2003, Johnny Paycheck died at the age of 64 in Nashville. From the stages of packed arenas to the humiliation of begging strangers for spare change, his story is as haunting as any country ballad he ever sang.
You could send some.
They called him the Hillbilly Heartthrob. His voice carried heartbreak, joy, and that restless fire that defined the golden age of country music. From the 1950s through the mid-80s, Faron Young was untouchable. When he signed with Capitol Records in 1952 and released his first hit, Going Steady, it was clear. This wasn't just another country singer. This was a star. And Faron lived like one. By the late 1960s, he wasn't just making money. He was building empires. He poured his success into real estate, launched Music City News, and even helped up-and-coming artists get their first breaks. At one point, it looked like nothing could stop him. But success in country music has a cruel way of turning sour. By the late 70s and 80s, the Nashville sound was evolving, and Faron's style suddenly sounded outdated. DJs and critics branded his music as yesterday. Radio, once his lifeline, abandoned him, and in one of the most tragic missteps of his career, Faron sold his catalog for a pittance. Imagine selling the very songs that built your fortune, only to watch others cash in while you struggled to pay the bills. As the spotlight faded, so did Faron's finances. Debts piled high. The isolation grew unbearable. By the mid-90s, depression had consumed him. And in December 1996, unable to carry the weight of failure and financial ruin, Faron Young ended his own life. Think about it. One of the founding fathers of modern country music, a man who built others' dreams, died stripped of dignity and hope. If that doesn't make you question the cost of fame, what does?
Oh, but baby, let's don't stay.
Born into a working-class family in Texas, Billie Joe Spears clawed her way to success. By 13, she was already recording. By the 1970s, she was a star, with hits like Blanket on the Ground, Mr. Walker, It's All Over, and 57 Chevrolet. Her voice was strong, her image was unapologetic, and she stood out in a male-dominated industry with songs that spoke to women's independence and strength. She should have been unstoppable, but success in country music is rarely permanent. By the 1990s, demand for Billie Joe's sound had dried up. Her label folded, her royalties disappeared. Worse still, throat surgery cut into her ability to perform. To make ends meet, Billie Joe played small club gigs for modest fees. She even tried touring overseas, but between poor exchange rates and visa expenses, she barely broke even. At home, she was forced to sell her possessions and move into a modest house, scraping by while gold records hung on her walls like cruel reminders of what she once had. On December 14, 2011, Billie Joe Spears died of cancer at 73. She left behind a catalog of hits, but very little money. The bitter irony? She had more gold records than she had dollars in her bank account.
Glee, or somewhere you're dancing.
Tommy Collins was more than a country singer. He was a writer, a craftsman, a visionary who helped shape the Bakersfield sound. Songs like If You Ain't Lovin', You Ain't Livin' and Carolyn became staples of the genre. His influence even reached into the 2000s, inspiring Craig Morgan's I Wish I Could See Bakersfield. But Tommy's demons never left him alone. He struggled with depression, slipping into dark spells that derailed his career. At one point, he abandoned his Cadillac on Highway 19, wandering off into a field where he disappeared for days. When he resurfaced, the IRS had gutted his bank accounts. Desperate to make ends meet, Collins left music behind for a time and even sold Bibles door to door. Imagine that. A man whose songs were making other artists rich, reduced to knocking on strangers' doors just to survive. Later, show promoters tried to resurrect his career, but by then, dementia had taken its grip. He couldn't return to the stage in the way fans remembered. On March 14, 2000, Tommy Collins passed away with virtually nothing to his name. Even as his compositions continue to earn for others, his story is one of the cruelest truths in music. The songwriter is often forgotten, while their words and melodies live on in the mouths and wallets of others.
Like your chicken southern fried. Well, it don't
A man whose voice was filled with raw emotion, who delivered 13 top 20 Billboard hits, and who looked destined to be one of country's biggest names. From hosting his own TV show in Bluefield, West Virginia, to hits like If I Had a Cheatin' Heart and Smoky Mountain Memories, Mel's career seemed unstoppable. Fans loved him, radio embraced him, and success was within his grasp. But behind the spotlight was a man fighting demons few knew about. When his record label folded, the financial and emotional pressure crushed him. He sank into depression, but he hid it well. To the public, he was still the star with a bright future. Then, in October 1978, on his 43rd birthday, tragedy struck. Just hours before a scheduled performance, Mel Street took his own life. His death shocked fans, friends, and the industry alike. The heartbreak didn't end there. When his friends searched his belongings, they discovered unpaid royalties, missing money, and debts he never revealed. His family couldn't even afford a funeral. Fellow musicians organized a benefit concert just to lay him to rest. 3 years later, his greatest hits album sold 400,000 copies. The money that could have saved him in life arrived only after his death. Mel Street's story is perhaps the most gut-wrenching of them all. A man who gave everything to his music, yet left the world broke, forgotten, and brokenhearted. Blaze Foley was the kind of artist who lived his music, raw, poetic, and unpolished. They called him the duct tape messiah because he'd literally patched together his boots, clothes, even his guitar cases with duct tape. To his fans, that wasn't poverty, it was authenticity. Blaze grew up in San Antonio, Texas, singing with his family gospel group, the Singing Fuller Family. From the beginning, he was drawn to the outsiders, the misfits, the kind of people country music often overlooked. His songs weren't just melodies, they were confessions. If I Could Fly remains one of his most haunting pieces, a cry for freedom wrapped in a whisper of hope. But Blaze never cared for fame or money. That might sound noble, but it was also his downfall. He refused to play the game, burned bridges with record executives, and gave away opportunities most artists would die for. And while he had talent that could have made him a household name, he chose to live hand to mouth, relying on bar gigs and couches to survive. Then in 1989, tragedy struck. Blaze was defending a friend during a fight when he was shot in the chest. He was only 39 years old. When paramedics checked his pockets, all they found was $30 and an uncashed royalty check. Today, Blaze is celebrated as a cult hero. Artists like Merle Haggard, Willie Nelson, and John Prine have covered his songs. But while his music grew in value after his death, Blaze Foley himself never saw the rewards. He died the way he lived, broke, defiant, and true to his art. From Faron Young to Mel Street, from Lefty Frizzell to Billy Joe Spears, these stories paint a devastating truth. Fame and fortune are temporary, but struggles, addictions, and betrayals can last forever. The country music industry builds legends, but it also leaves many of them behind, discarded when the next sound, the next star, comes along. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to know more about Dolly Parton's conflicts and disputes with other country music artists, check out the video you see on screen.